nice, perfect slices. Like, look at this. Perfect.
Some people call them bread knives, but we think serrated knives are much more versatile than that. We use them to cut everything from crusty baguettes and buttery brioche to tender cake layers and squishy tomatoes.
But there's another serrated knife you might want to consider, because lately I've really been enjoying my serrated utility knife.
We're going to prepare the same sandwich with these two different knives to compare and contrast what they're good at, what they're not so good at, and how different they really are.
First up, Hannah with our winning bread knife.
We are going to talk about serrated knives or bread knives. If you can tell, this is a serrated knife. This is our winner right here. It has all of these points along the bottom. We use knives like this for really hard or squishy things. The points get a purchase on the food, and then the gullies in between reduce the friction, which allows the knife to slide through the food easier. A really bad serrated knife, they're surprisingly common. I used to have one. You might too. If you think cutting bread is really hard, if you have a difficult time getting clean, even slices, it might be your knife. It might not be you, it might be the knife. There are all different patterns to the serrations. Some are scalloped, so not pointy. Others were really pointy. We tested 9 knives. The blade length ranged from 9.5 to 10.25. The cheapest one cost 20 bucks. The most expensive one cost $200. We rated the knives on 4 categories: cutting, how well they cut; comfort, how comfortable they were to handle; edge retention, how sharp they stayed during testing; and average serration width and depth. We weighed and measured all of the knives, and one of our key tests was to measure and count the serrations on each blade. So the first thing we found here was that the better a knife was, the fewer serrations it has, which was interesting to us because, you know, you'd think more teeth would be better at biting in. But we spoke with experts about this, and the reasoning behind that is, you know, you exert a certain amount of force into the blade, and then the blade inserts that force into the food. If you have a lot of serrations, the force you are exerting into the blade is divided amongst those serrations. So each serration actually gets less force or less oomph behind it. If you have fewer serrations, those serrations get more oomph behind it because the power is divided amongst them. So fewer serrations actually had more power. We also looked at the shape of the serrations and measured how pointy they were. Pointier serrations were better at biting into food. And the same force distribution theory applied here. The pointier the serration, the more loaded with power that very tip was. The broader the serration, or if it was scalloped, for example, you really divided that power out along that surface edge. So each point of the blade had less power behind it. So I have our winning knife right here from Mercer. It had fewer, very pointy serrations, and that was the key to its stellar bite. All right, so we are gonna make some sandwiches because we have these BLTs with crusty bread, tomatoes, slippery avocados, all of these ingredients that really show how good a serrated knife is or isn't. All right, let's start cutting some stuff up. All right, so we are gonna start with the bread. We always, for our knife testing, we use a bread from a great local company called Iggy's. This is their Francese loaf. We choose this specifically because it has a really rugged, crusty exterior and this beautiful, soft, custardy, pillowy interior that you really don't want to mess up. So it's perfect for testing. See, it's just so easy. Perfect even slices, minimal effort from the user. Just as a comparison, I want to show you what it's like to cut this crusty of a loaf with a less than ideal bread knife. Here we go. Oh my God, again, I didn't realize it would be that bad. Wow, so it's not even cutting into the bread. I gotta bring in the closer to do the job here. It's so much easier, and it really comes down to those serrations. This is a beautiful knife, and one of the most exciting things about it for a cheapskate like me is I think when we bought it, it was 23 bucks. So this is really a fantastic knife at a fantastic value. All right, so no BLT is complete without a really good tomato, the T in there. And you really want nice, complete slices so your sandwich is nice and even. You don't have a sloppy, messy tomato squishing out everywhere. Tomatoes in general are something we use for a lot of our knife testings because they have that firm exterior and a very soft interior. So that's a lot of textures to tackle. You want a knife that bites in. So we're gonna go ahead and slice this up and see how well these knives do. Oh, no hesitation, bites right in. You know, squishing, everything is nice and even. I can really control the thickness of my slice. You know, a really sharp chef's knife also does a great job on tomatoes, but because they have that firm skin on the outside, I really love a serrated knife for this task because those teeth just give you the perfect bite into it. All right, so I also want to show you slicing a tomato with a not so good serrated knife. Oh my gosh, it's not biting in. It's kind of dangerous. It's like spinning the tomato in my hand. It's totally shredding the skin and squishing it. Oh gosh. Yeah, that's very terrible. The skin is shredded, ragged. The slices are super uneven. Check that out. Just compared to these over here, I mean, that is the most perfect, precise, crisp round. So a really good serrated knife can make a huge difference.
For a long time at America's Test Kitchen, we've said there are 3 basic knives that you definitely need. One is the 8-inch chef knife. Another is the paring knife, which we like a 3 1/4 inch one. And the third is the bread knife, which Hannah has been telling you about. And it's a 10-inch bread knife. It's got serrations. So it's also called a serrated knife. However, there is a knife that I happen to love that's a good add-on, and that's this one. It's the utility serrated knife. It's about half the length of our bread knife. It's got the pointed tip like our paring knife, and it's, you know, at about 5.5 inches. It's almost as long as an 8-inch chef's knife. So it's got some of the attributes of each of those knives, but it puts it in a smaller package than the chef knife or the bread knife. In fact, several years ago, I did a story about knife sets, and I really complained about all these knives, these utility knives, as filler, that they were really not neither fish nor fowl. They weren't paring knives, they weren't chef's knives, they weren't bread knives. What were they for? So we actually decided to take a serious look at them, and we tested 8 knives. They were priced from about $7.50 all the way up to about $110. And we put them through all kinds of paces. We did tomatoes, we cut crusty baguettes, we sliced hard salami, and we quartered big, squashy bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches with avocado in there, because that's a real challenge for a serrated knife. Along the way, we rated them on 3: sharpness, blade design, and handle design. And we had lots of different people of different size hands and different skill levels try the knives to really see what they liked the best. In the end, this was our favorite. It's called the Zwilling Pro 5.5-inch serrated prep knife, and this was one of the more pricey ones at about $100. We do have a Best Buy by Kangshan Cutlery that's about half the price, but this one really was superior. Some of the things we loved about this knife: it has about 4.5 inches of serrations with an unserrated tip and heel. Now, manufacturers do that because they don't want the serrations to be a weak point in the knife. But that also meant that we got this lovely little tip that was very sharp and pointed. Not all of them had that. And we were able to use this to core tomatoes and do all kinds of detail work. It's a thicker knife. It's a little bit more rigid and has more structure. And that's nice when you're doing things like cutting through hard salami. A longer, floppier bread knife has a little more trouble with that. The heel, it's actually got a pretty high stance. It's wedge shaped. And that meant when you're cutting things, your knuckles are not hitting the cutting boards. And that's a real big problem especially for people with larger hands. In terms of the sharpness, this started out the sharpest and it ended up the sharpest. We cut tomatoes at the beginning and end of testing, and this one didn't lose any quality along the way. Some of them started out dull, and with a serrated knife, it's a little bit hard to sharpen. One of the beauties of serrations is that they don't get dull like a straight edge knife as fast. They can eventually dull out, but this one started sharp ended sharp. Okay, so I have the same bread loaf that Hannah has. This is from Iggy's Bread of the World, based here in Cambridge, Mass. It's got a hard crust and a fluffy, open, crumbed interior. And when you cut this with a bad knife, you just get a mess. And it's a little bit of a challenge to get through this crust. I'm gonna try to cut this. This is the large Francese loaf, and it's one of my favorites. It makes amazing toast, for one thing. Okay. First thing I notice is that this knife is not as long as this loaf of bread, and that's going to be a problem. I can turn it up on its edge, and I might do that because it's got a little bit more of a match there, but I can't do the thing where I would normally do, cutting across. I'll try, but we'll see what happens. This thing sinks right into this bread. Oh my goodness. But I'm kind of traveling around, going forward and back, trying to, it works. It's not as easy, but wow, nice and clean. Wow. We did this with some lesser serrated utility knives, and they just couldn't even get into this bread. This length is just about a little bit, would have been overmatched if it wasn't for the incredible sharpness and the really terrific serrations on this that bit right into that leathery crust. So I put this up on its side, but you know, that's a little precarious, and it really didn't come out quite as evenly. I have a little bump here. The slice is not quite as straight as it should have been. So I'm going to cut another one with it flat. Nice. Really does a good job. Although I will say, you know, again, I've got a really thin and fat bread slice here, which, you know, give me that 10-inch bread knife, Hannah, because this thing is too short. I think it'd be better for something like tomatoes. So we're going to cut those next. So I'm going to slice this tomato, but first I'm going to take the core out. And the nice thing about this knife, this utility knife, it has the little pointed tip of a paring knife. So, you know, if I were going to be doing this with my big old bread knife, that has a rounded tip. I'd have to get out a paring knife. This is one-stop shopping here. So you're just going to go in with that point. And I'm choking up on the blade here because with a paring knife, you're usually in really close. So I'm holding it almost by the blade, and I'm going in with the point, and I'm just going around that core so it won't get in my slices. And there we go. Now I'm just going to slice this tomato. Wow. It's just like silk. And you know, I'm able to get really even slices because it's not moving. It's not sliding around. It's not struggling. So one of the things we learned in this testing is definitely all utility knives are not created equal. This one was on the higher end, but the less expensive ones weren't as good. If you're going to get an extra knife to add on that's going to make your life easier, you want one that really performs. And while we hate to recommend a pricier knife, in this case, it's worth it. We're going to put together our BLTs, and then we're going to compare and see how the knives do.
All right, so we've got our sandwiches, the ultimate test here. Lisa and I are going to cut right down the center of these and see how it goes. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, here we go. The reveal. Ta-da! Nothing fell out. It worked. Yay.
Absolutely gorgeous. This looks so good. I'm hungry.
I know. Starving. So this knife really did it. I was able to cut through this sandwich nice and neatly. Nothing moved or shifted. But I have to say, during our testing, the less good utility knives made a mess. Everything went flying, and they were sawing and squishing, and you know, you don't want to go there. So that said, little guy, good job. So as we saw, both knives have their strengths and weaknesses. And you know, in particular, the serrated utility knife has some issues with length. It's, you know, with those large loaves of bread, it's a little short. You need that length of the bread knife. That little short utility knife, it's just not going to cut it. Sorry.
Yeah, you know, I agree. If you're gonna buy just one toothy knife like this, you probably should get a serrated knife or a bread knife. But I will say, you know, there are really two camps with knives, the minimalist and the maximalist. Do you want to get the 3 knives that we've mentioned before, a chef's knife, a paring knife, and a serrated knife, and do everything with those? You know, you can, and that's great, and that works really well. Or you can have some fun with it. You know, you can tinker, you can add knives to your collection, you can pull them out for particular tasks that they just really like shine at, and both ways are great. I have our second place utility knife right here. We got this for our wedding, and Apologies to cousin Eden, but when we got it, I was like, oh, like, what is that knife? That's such a random knife. I'm never going to use that. But I've been married for 8 years now, and I have slowly fallen in love with this knife, you know, my husband too, but no, the knife over the 8 years, I really have come to love it, and I use it all the time. All right, so do you absolutely need this knife? No, but it's a great addition to anyone's kitchen. Lisa and I have both fallen in love with ours, and it's really fun to use the perfect knife for the task at hand.
For more information on the utility knife and the serrated bread knife, check out the links below.
And make sure to ask us your knife questions in the comments and hit that subscribe button.